where the industries, so to say, the textile mills had closed down when the 1990 economic reforms kicked in, and they made way for new sectors such as information technology, advertising, banking, and finance to flourish in Mumbai. And of course, Bollywood and other entertainment industries on their part, the nightlife, the shopping malls, the nightclubs have played a role in instilling an uptown lifestyle in Mumbai. What that also has done simultaneously is it has led to the systematic gentrification of the city in pockets where wealthy people came and located situated themselves in the city's new and old central business districts. For people who are familiar with Mumbai, the Girgaon Chowpatty area, the Parel, Lower Parel area, maybe parts of Bandra, other areas, you see this phenomena where that they're coming and settling down in these areas created a localized economy, which also then gave rise to hike in rent and property value, which then, of course, was to the detriment of the older residents of these areas who were either marginalized or displaced altogether. But simultaneously, what's also happened is that Mumbai has expanded farther to the suburban towns of Virar, Navi Mumbai, Thane, etc., and now become a megalopolis, which is supported by, of course, a robust railway network and other public modes of transportation. So, in all, Mumbai is a city that, of course, it is the most populated city of India, but it also attracts a lot of migrant population, given that it's aspirational to be a part of the never-ending growth story of Mumbai. But what that has done is, like the perils of any growing city, Mumbai has its own challenges. To name a few, the public transportation system, I'm sure everyone here would have experienced at some point of time, is almost ripping at her seams, unable to carry citizens across the megalopolis, no matter how much infrastructural development or new trains and buses get introduced. The cost of living is a bane for one and all, irrespective of the different strata of society that people live in. Housing is a perennial problem, which is driving people to the fringes of the city or even away in many cases. During monsoons, like we are in right now, roads and railway tracks get inundated with water, traffic woes. People find it difficult to transport themselves from one place to another. And of course, we see climate change and weather events kicked in majorly in the recent past, and the environmental degradation that all the building of infrastructure is, uh, is pushing our way is also something that it's a lived reality. So they are posing a serious challenges to the slender peninsula. We've also seen reports that say that by 2050, most parts of Mumbai will be underwater. So in a nutshell, the city of dreams is in danger, is highly vulnerable, and we need to do something about it right now. So that's about the growing challenges. Uh, we have, as part of the position paper, named some of these emerging tensions. Because these tensions, we believe, have caused in large part because of the existing paradigm of which Mumbai as a city is a model, where the urban landscape in the 21st century is it started expressing itself in a multiple complex ways, and we see urban stressors such as traffic congestion, like I already said, air and sound pollution, overcrowding, excessive waste generation. These are some of the issues, and we'll talk about it in detail with Manas in a minute. But what we've also realized is that it's high time that uh, these macro shifts that are driving the systemic changes and changing um, Mumbai's character for good need to be dealt with using a systems approach. And that a good starting point would be revisiting, reimagining, and managing urban environments, which are currently being managed in a semi-planned and ill-equipped manner, which is why that brings us to the question of what some of these transitions in the Mumbai context could look like. And by transitions, we mean some provocations or some desirable future states uh, that need to take place for the city to thrive once again and be sustainable, livable, and a happy place for people from different strata of the society. So we have addressed or identified four such transitions as part of our position paper. One is from growth to a degrowth mindset. The second one is from demanding public goods to evolving citizen-led initiatives for cultivating commons. Some example there are the Sunday Streets initiative by the Mumbai Police or the beach cleanup in Warsaw. The third transition that we've looked at is from piecemeal approaches to perceiving cities as complex socio-ecological technical systems. And the fourth is from extractive to regenerative resource management. So we aren't in any way saying that these are the only things that need to happen, but uh, these are some things that we would like to begin with. And this conversation itself is work in progress in that sense. But yeah, in summary, we want to say that tackling most of the emergent tensions that Mumbai and cities like her face necessitates a systems innovation approach, which will take into account interrelated factors. And then we also need the involvement of diverse set of stakeholders, such as government agencies, the private sector, the academia, citizens such as you and me, to take up and discuss the problems in using a systems innovation approach, which will help us to get to the root causes of these tensions and design interventions that address the systemic barriers that prevent effective solutions from being implemented. So I'll just end my presentation with a quote, which reads, "We can solve the complex problems that our governments, societies, and environment face. To do so, we need to shift from trying to improve the efficiency of what was to redesigning what would be." Thank you so much. I am going to stop sharing my PPT and invite you all for some quick comments, thoughts. I hope people have had an occasion to read the position paper. If not, I'd also request one of my team members to put it in the chat box for people who have not had the chance. But yeah, uh, any quick thoughts before I introduce the guest and move on to the discussion?
To echo what you said, Maya, just now, because it looks like it has been looked at from various perspectives in terms of what is, and I'm sure these would have, there would have been some dialogue, some we know intuitively, some dialogues would have happened in order for this to actually come together and say that, okay, now what are we really looking at? And I love the fact that, the first one was about degrowth. So I think that's where my curiosity is piqued.
Right, right. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And it gives me a chance to again reiterate that, tomorrow's event, in fact, is an opportunity for us to look at these things as to what does a degrowth mindset look like, or what do we mean by regenerative resource management? Because we are not experts, but we are brave enough to start this conversation with people who care, because we know we are a lot of people who care. And so, yeah, with that, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce the guest for today. First of all, I thank you, Manas, for agreeing to do this along with us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Maya. Thank you, Anshul. Very happy to be here.
So, Manas is the founder of Leap Cities, which provides long-term strategic advice to businesses and NGOs that are solving urban problems to make Indian cities sustainable, livable, healthier, and happier. That's quite a mouthful. So he also runs collective action programs focusing on air and noise pollution, waste management, public spaces and public transportation, etc. One of which Anshul and I have the good fortune of being a part of is the Leap Cities Fellowship, which we will cover in a bit. Manas is also senior advisor at Borda, where he has worked extensively on investment models and public-private partnerships for wastewater management. And he advises the Dutch WASH-focused Take a Shake Impact Investment Fund. Besides all this, Manas is a graduate of MIT, the Massachusetts Institutes of Technology, and Sloan School of Management. He is also enrolled in the PhD program at IIT Mumbai. He is a Reiki master and student of Vedanta and Buddhism. Wow. So Manas is uh, wearing multiple hats, as you can see, and I will take this opportunity to thank you and invite him to this conversation once again, which is on the story of systems in Mumbai city. I would like you to start with telling us, if you happen to meet somebody for the first time, how would you describe what you do for a living?
Well, thanks, Maya. It's very nice to be here. Um, I think let me break it up into, I think some of the things you said are things we are trying to do. I won't say we're doing it yet.
Mhm.
All big, the problem with big and complex things is that things are always a work in progress, right? But one has to start.
Absolutely.
Uh,
Yeah.
I think, the way I would introduce today, right now, is, I primarily run an organization called Leap Cities. It stands for Leadership, Excellence, and Partnership for Cities. The idea is that if you want to solve complicated problems, we need partnership.
Mhm.
If you want to be a good partner in any initiative, you have to pursue excellence in what you do. Otherwise, you're more of a problem than a solution. And for any organization or even individual to really pursue excellence, it requires a certain kind of leadership in order to pursue that excellence over a period of time. So it's Leap Cities. And what we do is, what I personally also enjoy is working with organizations who are trying to solve deeper issues and provide them with long-term management and strategic support to the extent that we can, so they can excel at what they do and develop their leadership, excellence, and partnership.
Mhm.
And really sort of try to look at things in a more holistic and long-term manner, which also means bringing different people and stakeholders and organizations together to see where they can multiply their impact or multiply the outcomes of what they're doing through collaboration and partnership and so on. Um, as you said, I've had the fortune to do various things in life.
Mhm.
And what that has given me is the opportunity to try and look at things through, various lenses, right? So technology, and then looking at financial systems and governance and politics, looking at how organizations are structured. And of course, our belief systems and our behavior norms, a lot of which has
Mhm.
been inspired through my sort of more philosophical and spiritual explorations and studies. So to try and
Mhm.
take a comprehensive view on things, which of course is critical for any kind of systems thinking approach, right? So that's really what I do. And over the last few years, my focus has increasingly been on urban issues, especially
Mhm.
water, waste management, public spaces, transportation, urban agriculture. And broadly now, a lot of focus is on blue and green infrastructure as a contrast to the
Okay.
gray infrastructure that we have, which is all cement based, looking more
Mhm.
at blue and green infrastructure for cities. So that's a long introduction to what I do.
Interesting. Thank you very much. And so I would like to take you back a little in the past and ask you if there has been certain motivation or certain influences. It could be an event, it could be people, which have shaped your thinking and led you to do the work that you do currently.
Sure. So I can go reasonably far back in the future. I can't see all the faces here, so I'm not sure what age profile we have in the audience. It'd be great if more people can turn on the video. That's always nicer than talking to black boxes. But yeah, I'll highlight a few few things. I think somewhere. So one of my first real educations was, I was very fortunate that during my undergraduate years, through what one would consider chance, but of course, nothing is a coincidence. I got a chance to work for almost 4.5 years in the System Dynamics in Education project, which was led by the founder of System Dynamics, Professor J. Forrester, who created the field in the 1960s and 70s. We wrote papers about how to use system dynamics in education, mainly around K-12 education, school children. And we also conducted distance learning programs. It's now the late 90s, so it was all email-based for teachers and for managers, where we had government, officers and fairly senior managers actually in that program. And it taught me a few things. One is, of course, studying system dynamics taught me how to look at everything from a interconnected manner, right? So how do you think feedback loops and delays and non-linearities? And it really becomes a way of looking at the world and looking at everything in a way that never leaves you. It just shifts your perspective. The other benefit of working with somebody like Jay Forrester, and just to give some context, in 2003 or 2005, I saw there's a global society called the Society of Futurists. And they publish, every decade or so, they publish a list of sort of the top 100 thinkers, right? And you have Isaac Newton at, I remember 32 or 33 was Isaac Newton. And you had Albert Einstein at 18 or 19. And all these phenomenal names, right? And actually Jay Forrester was listed at number 9 on that list. So no mean feat, right? I think the tragedy of one of the tragedies of my life is, working for him at that age, I never appreciated what knowledge I had access to. And so I wish if I could go back and work for him today, it would be such a phenomenal experience, but it was. So one of the things about working with him was, he challenged everything, right? He questioned everything. And that's because as he developed these ideas around system dynamics, he found more and more cases where mainstream thinking, even when it was promoted by sort of the most well-known and the smartest and the most powerful mind, was just plain wrong about a lot of issues. And therefore, it cultivated this idea that you can question anything and you can question everyone and don't take anything as a given truth. Which have both been good and bad in life. You can see the downside of that. I then worked the next sort of 2 major experiences where I worked with a amazing investment bank, called Avendus Capital, incredible team, very, very creative, worked with some amazing entrepreneurs, helping them with building their businesses, growing their businesses. And what I learned there is, stuff I use every day in my work since then. And then working with 2 NGOs, Dasra and Borda, is where I really started understanding the social and environmental sectors. The way they look at problems and solutions, looking at things like equity and equality, which you don't really, at least in those days, you didn't come across in the corporate life or in the business world. You never really thought about those sort of things. So I got to work with amazing NGOs and, social businesses. And that then took me in the direction, especially at Borda, wonderful boss named Stanzin. We did a lot of work in Ladakh around sustainable cities. And that really took me to applying my systems lens and the business and the financing lens to saying, how do we look at cities as a system and think about how the different pieces fit together? What's the goal of the system? And therefore, how do we think about happier cities? And that then led to my work in setting up Leap Cities. Happiness came up, and I'll just stop at this. Happiness came up quite interestingly. We were helping Ladakh in Leh to develop a vision, and we call it the Vision 2030, a very grand Vision 2030. And I'd keep asking people, and I was sort of one of the ones who were supposed to edit that whole report, put it together. We had a great team working on it, and we kept saying, "Look, what kind of city do you want?" And people would say, "Oh, very vague. It should be a nice city. It should be cultural. We should have a heritage, and there should be water security." And we weren't getting at something which you could sort of rally around and say, "This is the kind of future we want," right? For one conversation, and I said, "Look, this is a Buddhist society, right? And Buddhism, what's the most important thing? It is to be happy." So don't you want a city
Yes.
that's happier? And kind of like, people started nodding their heads, and we said, yeah, that sounds interesting. It sounded a very vague thing, right? It almost sounds so audacious. It sounds so almost childish and silly to say we want to be a happier society, right? It's one of those woo-woo things that don't happen in serious conversation. But then we
Right.
actually rallied around the fact that can we make Leh a happier city? And therefore, a lot of the thought process around the vision sort of rallied around that. I, honestly don't know how well they have been using that vision lately. And then COVID happened, and so much has changed. But every now and then I hear that they still refer to the Vision 2030 and see, what does this say about doing things? But so that's where the idea of happiness came in, and then with Leap Cities, we developed it further into healthier and then livable and sustainable. And I feel if we can get livable plus sustainable, you'll have a healthier city in all senses: physical health, mental health, social health. And if you have all that, then you should have a happier city and society. So that's kind of what we hope we can contribute towards or work with partners to build in India.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you for, I mean, it all, happiness is something that you just mention happiness and you feel happy. You know what I mean? But I'm just going to play devil's advocate here, and then just going to throw this back at you a little, Manas, and say, okay, so you probably could do that with a lay, but then when you think about Mumbai, uh, then the equation and the dynamic of everything changes. So then in that context, uh, you know, how would you define then a sustainable and a livable and a happy city if it were to be anything like Mumbai? uh, I mean, what would that look like from a people's perspective? Are there lessons that you've learned in the past, like you just shared, which you can use and adapt to the context of Mumbai?
No, absolutely. So, even if we look at the words in the chat, right, when you ask the question, what does Mumbai, what does Mumbai mean to people, even on
Hmm.
this small group, right?
Yeah.
There are a lot of contradictory terms that come up. And actually, a lot of things that are inherent about the city don't necessarily contribute towards happiness, right? And again, maybe there's a sort of an age bias over here as well. But when you think about things like speed, and people are always busy, and people are always so engrossed in what they're doing, there is an upside to that. I won't deny that. But then that also leads to a sort of a focus around yourself and your own private life, which I think detaches people from the public life, right?
Hmm.
As cities become bigger, distances become greater, and you lose connection with what is going on. And I think that is not good for either a livable city or a sustainable city or a healthy city or a happy city. So in some ways, the challenge of Mumbai is much greater than other towns of India. On the
Hmm.
other hand, look, the city has always had a great culture of people coming together. But then I say that, the Mumbai, what is it, the spirit of Mumbai, right? It
Right.
usually starts when there's a crisis, and it
Yeah.
finishes 72 hours after the crisis, right? In that time frame, we are amazing, amazing people and neighbors and citizens. And
We are
before,
Jugaad people.
uh, what?
Jugaad people.
And before and after that, the spirit of Mumbai is somewhere in the background. Now, to be fair, I should. There are amazing things about the city which we may take for granted. Safety and also when you hear people who have come into Mumbai, not from here, they sort of value those things, and I think we should hold on to that. And I'm not downplaying those things. But yes, Mumbai is a difficult city, but I think it's got the resources, it's got the spirit, it's got the ability to do things, take charge. So in some ways, I feel that it's the hardest city to do things in. And in some ways, I feel that if anyone can do it, it probably is a city like Mumbai. Now, I'll say one more thing that I have seen, that, when a big change is needed, you kind
Mhm.
of need two things, right? You need something to run away from, and you need
Mhm.
something to run towards. And you typically run away from pain, and you run towards something that seems like a better future. And
Mhm.
in this sense, I think that the kind of city Mumbai is, I think it's a very painful city to live in, right?
Okay.
People, I mean, there is, there's a tremendous amount of, even if people don't realize it, or they say, oh, this is part of life, or this is how things are, and we kind of brush it under the carpet with that. It is a hard and a painful city to live in. So to some extent, I feel we can get people to run away from that and say, look, how do we build something better? And if you want to build something better, I think Mumbai has got more knowledge, financial resources, exposure. People have traveled. It's an international city of, by any definition, it is an international city. And so therefore, I think we can create that vision of what to run towards and what sort of change to see. So whether it's in public transportation or in public spaces or greenification or sort of, responsible and green real estate or sustainable housing, I think there's a lot that can be done. But I think what that needs is enough people need to get more engaged with these problems. And that's not happening today. And we need enough decision makers, both in the private sector, social sector, and the government sector, who sort of can imagine this future and are willing to put energy into it. And there are structural issues, I think, in the way we govern Indian cities that sometimes in the way of this kind of collaboration. And that's why I think a systems thinking approach, a system dynamics approach, I think can really bring people together and make that change.
Yeah, I think in part you've already answered what I would have liked you to address. So, the part about just the citizens or just the government cannot do enough. So how do we weave in the collaboration and the efforts of a diverse set of stakeholders to make Mumbai a more sustainable, livable city? And what role can systems thinking play? If you could elaborate that a little, keeping or referring to your fellowship, how you've imagined that to be, that'll help. And then I would also open the stage for a couple of participant questions if anyone have anything in mind. But first, you can address that, Manas.
Okay. So I think, with anything, right? Even when you use systems thinking, you have to have some vision or you have to have a certain question in mind that one is trying to solve. And that means creating some sort of vision of what the goal also is. And here I'll just use some notes that I have. When I looked at all these, the various models, most of them developed in Western countries where obviously the urbanization situation is so different. You have all these models for what a great city looks like and what makes a great city and so on, right? And looking at Indian cities, I think I've got six parameters that we can use to look at what kind of city would be a nicer place, a more livable and sustainable city. First, the city has to be safe. It has to make people of all kinds of people, gender, age, income profile, etc. It has to make people feel safe, right? If you don't have safety, you don't have a great city.
Right.
What did I just press something? Okay. The second is cities should be comfortable, right? Excessive comfort is not necessary, like 10 minutes delivery for everything, etc. But it needs to be comfortable at a certain minimum level. And it has to be comfortable for everybody, both the public domain and in the private domain, right? Which means the housing should also be decent so people can be comfortable in private, but then the public spaces must be comfortable. That means taking care of a lot of like pollution, air and noise pollution, the quality of public services, public spaces, etc. Third is a city must be convenient. You can't expect people to jump through too many hurdles to get through day-to-day life. So a certain level of convenience, should be built into our public services, into our public spaces, into our design, etc. Fourth is affordable, which is something you talked about, the gentrification, etc. How do we keep, so that even somebody, and I would say that, how do we think about affordability? Can somebody with below average income still have a decent quality of life, right? Could be one way to think about, is the city affordable? A lot of free things, things that don't cost much and they can be provided to citizens free of cost, which reduce the cost of living and so on, and that should be provided in abundance. The fifth is to have a city that is creative or beautiful. We underplay aesthetics. It's seen as a rich person's thing. It's not, we say, oh, we're a poor country, we can't afford aesthetics. I say rubbish, you probably spend more money doing ugly things than doing beautiful things, right? It's a perspective, yes, you can spend a lot of money doing beautiful things, but you can also do very beautiful things for a low cost and sometimes lower cost than the way I see spending money. Even, buildings and bridges and sidewalks can be beautiful. And lastly, a city should create opportunity. Now we tend to think of opportunity as economic opportunity, right? Jobs and livelihoods. And yes, that is, that's obviously very important. But we also need to create opportunity for people to come together, to participate, to do things for each other. I think one of the big disservices, and I learned this from hanging out with Jay Forrester, one of the big disservices that economics has done is that made us feel like everything is about money and utility maximization, right? And
Right.
the point is actually before the economics kicks in, people want to be useful to each other. And all kinds of sociology and psychology show that most people want to be useful to each other. They want to be nice to each other. The system must support that. And therefore, cities can create opportunities for people to, to come together and do things for each other. And that will also combat your isolation and low self-worth, feeling disconnected, and all the mental health and social health problems that we create. So first thing is, if we agree to some version of these 5, 6, 7 sort of goals, then I think we can start making up, start a conversation which says, okay, now how do we get there, right? And here, there are a couple of perspectives I would bring in. See, one is that I don't believe that problems exist on their own, right? Problems come because of nature, because of various reasons, but they tend to get solved. And if a problem is not getting solved over a period of time, it means that somebody benefits from that problem and they're keeping that problem alive, right? And you look at this from a geopolitical perspective, all the problematic hotspots in the world are not people organically fighting with each other. I mean, there are very clear designs and interests that keep people fighting and keep sort of things problematic. In Mumbai's context, if you look at the slums of Mumbai, right, which you can argue are probably the biggest sort of quality of life disaster for a city of this size and wealth and intellect, look, there's a lot of money to be made in slums. It's not an accident that they continue to thrive or grow decade after decade, right? So there are very clear forces that benefit from it, and therefore their interest is in keeping them the way they are, right? And so you fight sort of the change that people would otherwise organically create to improve their quality of life. And therefore, those are things that need to be actively fought against. There are very rose-tinted notions that if we just bring people together and have these multilateral conversations, people will come together and solve their problem, and tomorrow will be beautiful and better. And I say, no, that's bullshit, right? It's not proven to be true anywhere or at any time. We have to, really put in a lot of hard work to understand each of these issues, and then maybe I've gone on long enough already. But I think that's where the process of systems thinking actually starts. Because once you recognize, you set certain goals, you recognize the barriers, the actual real barriers in achieving these goals. And then when you have a systems thinking driven conversation about different issues, ask the why question, keep going deeper into why is this happening? What is actually going on at the dynamics level? Then you start making progress towards what can be done to overcome these issues.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a difficult ask as well, right? But I will also let others come in with their comments and questions, and then
Can I ask something?
sure.
It's very good, very nice listening to you, Manas. The question that I have is, are there any cities in India or around the world who have used systems thinking approach to make changes that has made the citizens' life better, from where we can, draw some inspiration?
There has been actually, so even in system dynamics, and again, like I said, not everything necessarily comes under the systems thinking umbrella as a label, but sometimes people use systems thinking under various names, but the approach is kind of similar, right? So if you think about, so let me just define, just so that we're all on the same page. So systems thinking, really what it does is it looks at everything as a addition of subsystems which interact with each other. And because of the rules that determine that drive the behavior within these systems, they generate certain behavior over time, right? And therefore, any kind of holistic thinking, looking at feedback loops does start tending towards a systems thinking approach. One of the first books, in fact, that Jay Forrester wrote was Urban Dynamics, and this was late 1960s, early 1970s in the US. And public housing, which are called the projects, was a big problem. We're crazy about crime and so on, happening in low-income housing in the US. And the solution always seemed to be we need more low-income housing, and there are these huge projects being built with low-income housing. And his models, which he built along with the mayor of the ex-mayor of Boston, actually suggested that building low-income housing was the problem. They said you put a lot of people who are low-income with no economic prospect into one place. And it's very expensive for them to commute and find opportunity, and then they feed on this negative cycle of crime and drug abuse and lack of jobs and no money, which makes people violent, right? And he said, break up these large projects and make small, scatter people around the city where they're closer to opportunity. They interact more with not just low-income people, but with, people of different groups. And that will actually improve the outcomes. And therefore, it had a big policy impact on how, and if you see the 1970s and 80s, a lot of the big mega low-income projects were sort of literally pulled down and people were spread out into cities, and you see a whole different approach to low-income housing. That's one of the examples that comes up. But people have used it for transportation, looking at how transportation is. So you get transportation planners, right, in many countries, and they only focus on transportation. And when you have had cases, and I've seen this in European cities, I've seen this in Seoul, in Korea, where they started looking at transportation alongside, how people live and work. You had very different networks. Thinking the 15-minute city kind of came out of that idea that people should live and work close together. Not that you have housing here, commercial here, and then high, big roads and metros to connect the two, right? You sort of integrate stuff. So yeah, there's been a lot of studies, a lot of thought ideas and frameworks that are evolved through systems thinking approaches that are relevant for how we, how we design and how we run our cities.
Thanks, Manas.
Yeah. I think
Rachit?
Okay.
Yeah. I was just asking if Rachit wants to talk a little. He's written in the chat box something like what Saudi is doing. So I just wanted to.
Hi, Maya.
Hi.
Thanks. And hi, Manas. I actually missed like the first 40 minutes of this conversation. So I'm just here now. So, I mean, from my understanding of what Manas was just speaking over the last 2 minutes is something like what Saudi is doing with the NEOM, right? Like where they plan to make everything in like your work, your school, your house, everything within like 5 to 10 kilometer radius. So I think that's what an example of system thinking is, right?
Yes. And I'd say yes, and maybe a bit of no as well, right? I mean, in the sense, I think the idea is very good. Keep things close, etc. I cannot understand how a 100-kilometer long narrow passageway becomes the optimal city design. I mean, I've tried to look at it from the Saudi climatic conditions. You want to minimize shade, therefore you keep it narrow from a cooling effect perspective. But I don't know, I'm highly skeptical of a over-engineered system also, because whenever we have tried to create cities, and you look at these examples, right? Across the world, creating cities from scratch has been a very, very difficult experience, okay? India tried building cities in the 1960s and 70s. These were mostly industrial cities, and none of them became great cities to live in. People went there to work for a factory, but that was pretty much it, right? People usually, except for Jamshedpur is maybe one example, people sort of ran away from it once their work was finished. Even globally, China has tried to build a lot of cities, and they've only been, had mediocre success despite all the money they put in. So I'll sit on the fence on NEOM, but I think they could have come up with a much more livable system, which would have the space to organically also develop over time, while creating strict guidelines of what you can and cannot do, right? And I feel 100-kilometer distance, to my mind, that doesn't make sense. But let's see, maybe they'll prove me wrong and create something that becomes something that others can also replicate.
Right. Got it. Thanks.
Yeah, Royden, go for it.
Yeah, hi Manas and hi everyone. So my question is, given the example of just gave right now in Urban Dynamics book, where he mentioned that rather than creating like one specific area for the low income people, you segregate it so that they can interflow in the economic opportunities. But as I was just wondering, like always about society, it's also filled with incentive flows, like maybe just another word for like, dynamic systems, but it's also people. And then with people comes the subjectivity as interest. So I was also thinking, like, what if like, since we're living in a democratic country, and let's say a democratic society, there's also room for lobbying. Like some people will be like, oh, do not put them in segregation. We need like a posh, like, maybe in the informal language, if I may say, let's say, for example, like an international example of like in South Africa, like the segregation. Now we're fortunate enough, we don't have that extreme cases, but still, I feel in my perspective, people would still be like, no, let's keep them aside for some sort of reasons.
Yeah.
How do you see that, we might have plans in hand, but as long as if we cannot get people on the same plane, how can we go forward in that sense?
I mean, look, what you have pointed to is the most difficult question, right? And I think that question is one of what do we value as a society, as people, what do we value? Now, we have an economic system which seems like everybody in the world has either bought into or is increasingly buying into, which is we need more GDP, higher income, more consumption. And it's sort of a mindless, Maya talked about degrowth. To my mind, look, I firmly believe in the idea of degrowth, right? But the problem is people think degrowth is a negative because who wants to shrink? But what we need to think about is economic degrowth for some people, economic growth for some people, those who really have too little, right? They definitely need to see incomes rising and consumption rising to some extent. A lot of people can see degrowth. But what we need to grow is, again, it comes down to happiness, right? If we think about growing our happiness and say the goal is not to expand the GDP, assuming that will trickle down into all the good things that are promised to us. And for some of it works out, right? And for a lot of people, it doesn't work out. Whereas if we really focus on their happiness factor, then I think we can actually decouple our economy from a lot of consumption and create actually a much better quality of life. But the issue really comes down to, what do people want, right? And today, I think we are, I'll say we are running behind what the paradigm that, let's say, the US or the West has created. And everyone wants, if you ask me, and I think I'm somewhat of a socialist, but not entirely, I would say, look, do we need to should we be celebrating, how many Mercedes and Audis are bought in this country, or should we be crying about it, right? That people spend 70 lakhs on a car instead of, using the money to house more people or create more just living and working environments. I think this is not just a political issue, right? And it's not a new thing. Maybe we're going a bit off topic, but since we're talking about systems, I think it's important. India has been a very exploitative and divided society for centuries, right? If you think about our gender issues, our caste-related issues, these are not new things. They have been around for a very, very long time. And therefore, we have a very deep history of, trying to sort of, exploit others. Let me just say that. And I don't buy into this notion that India is a very peaceful country and we love everyone and we never fight anybody. I say, look, we are so busy fighting each other, we don't need to attack other countries, right? Why waste our time going far away to fight wars? We have a war, right in our backyard every day. So yes, you're right. That till people don't change, till people don't value each other's happiness more, each other's comfort more, it's going to be an uphill and a long battle, right? And that sort of explains why we are in this situation, why we're not able to make the progress that otherwise a state of, intellectual ability and wealth and our history and our philosophy, you put all that together and say, what sort of society should we have had by now? It would be a far more evolved and a much nicer place for many more people. But it's our behaviors that kind of keep us down. And our cities have to fight the same battle, which is why more and more people need to ask these sort of questions, think about these sort of issues, and see what role we can play.
Probably as just to end this question, probably the hope would be like say a deep thinking or a system dynamic thinking would make an incentive plan for even all the people to not even touching the moral grounds. You're so inclined to develop the whole city, it actually even helps you. So probably that can be a single hope without touching the subjectivity of morals and all that. So yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. But very, very honestly, Royden, I don't know of a conversation. Once you ask why does this problem exist, and you ask it enough time, I have not had one conversation that did not at the end of the day land up at a moral or a perspective issue where what we value ultimately determines our policies, our behavior, our media, what we accept, what we reject. As long as I believe that I want to get richer, it is always going to be at somebody else's expense. And that's where all the problems start. So I think at some point it is very difficult At least I've not found a way to avoid the moral question entirely and find sort of a technocratic, technological, financial solution that that would ultimately work. But yes, we can make a lot of progress even without touching the moral issue. I'll give you that for sure. Yes.
Okay, I'm just going to quickly step in because this is about conversations around how to make the cities and the city of Mumbai sustainable. I want all of the people who have raised hands address their questions and comments. I just request you to keep it snappy because, in the interest of time. So we'll start with Hari and yeah.
Maybe just a couple of comments or observations. Manas, so in the systems thinkings, we say that the solution to the problem may not be near or exactly at the problem, but it may be somewhere else. So adding to the two things you said, like one is 6 principles you quoted, safety and happiness and all those things about the defining the city. Then also you quoted the low income houses created the problems. So solution to the problems of any city, maybe Mumbai or anything, maybe is in developing the villages or the parts which is not the cities, maybe the rural areas and all those things. It may be the solution. I know it's an age-old discussion goes on, but again, maybe revisiting this may help.
The thing is, look, cities have huge. I've got nothing against rural areas, right? But we also have to acknowledge that there's a reason. There's both an economic and there's a social reason why people want to be close to other people, and that's how the cities were formed and so on. I agree with you that mega cities are a problem. I look at India's mega cities, I see as a result of a failed economic planning, right? Why 20 million people need to come and aggregate in one place versus 2 million people in 10 different places. That would be the right paradigm for a country like India. But we didn't build the infrastructure, the economy, the opportunity, and therefore, everyone feels the need to pile onto the same 3, 4, 5 cities and travel 1,500 kilometers to be there, right? So that's definitely a disaster. But cities can be, if you think of it more, more holistically and more systemically. So I'll give you one simple example, right? And you see these conflicts everywhere. The auto industry is a big driver of our GDP, and therefore, when the auto industry grows, it's headline news. If auto sales come down, it's also headline news, right? And then they want government intervention and so on. But everywhere in the world, we have seen that the auto industry directly competes with public transportation. Okay. And in fact, the US, there are a lot of cases in the 30s and 1930s and 1940s. The auto industry systematically shut down public transportation, so people would have to buy more cars. And then with more cars, you need more roads. So you have the endless. Today, if you look at Bombay, 1990s, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, is when we started really building flyovers in the city, right? And when I was a child in the 80s, you could count the number of flyovers in Mumbai on one hand. Okay. And today, there's just flyovers everywhere. And the average speed is still going down and down and down. Why? Because we've got less than 3,000 buses on the road. All right. I looked this up and I'll just elaborate on this because it is a systems thinking perspective. Singapore has 4,500 buses on the road. Okay, it is much smaller than Mumbai. It also has an amazing metro system. Even then, it has got 4,000 plus buses. New York has got 4,000 plus buses on the road. Again, complemented, similar size as Bombay, fewer people, amazing metro system, yet so many buses. Our BST, and it's bid to be, I don't know what, financial sustainability, mismanagement, whatever it is, you've got less than 3,000 buses on the road. Okay, so people have to buy cars, and then you have, your road expansion keeps going on. So the cement industry makes a lot of money. We are dealing with the air pollution as a result of it, and the traffic just keeps growing, right? So when we look at it and say one thing looks good, auto sales are up, that's good for the economy, but then what are the consequences which are making still quality of life worse, at least in certain cities and certain places? So we have to look at all these trade-offs, and at the end of the day, ask, look, who's benefiting from this, right? For sure, more roads and more cars are better for the economy, for economic growth, than public transportation. Okay, and public transportation, you provide similar services at a fraction of the cost, but that's not good for GDP growth. So you want to be a $5 trillion economy, So Jay Forrester used to say, right, when people get sick, it is good for the economy. Healthy people are terrible for the economy, right? They don't consume medicine, they don't need doctors, they don't need hospitals, they don't need insurance. So, Cycling, terrible for the economy, right? 10,000 rupees for a cycle. I mean, look at all that petrol that we are not importing and all those roads that we don't need. Horrible for the economy. So, what do we do? So it comes back to what we value.
Just a closing comment. So it's been like 20 years in the city. Initially, it's about like, widening the roads and constructing the bridges and all doing that. Once that came and settled in 1 year, then we started digging everything for the metros and all those things. And I'm sure it's not going to end here. Like something going to come when the metros are settled. So it's all the business model it goes on. And I think the concept of like comfort, safety, and sustainability, it's just like it's a process, far-fetched process, which we keep on running. We may never achieve something like that.
And that's why we need more conversation and more action around it. Yeah, thank you.
Yes. Anya?
I think Saraswati also had a question.
Yeah, I'll come back to her.
It's okay.
Okay. Anya, and then we have a couple of questions in the chat box, so we'll take one question from there as well. But Anya, go for it.
Okay, I have a question about relating to the previous conversation. So what do you think, Manas, can be done to integrate more systems thinking and systems-based decision-making to tackle wicked problems such as the traffic problems on the highways? And as we know, there is this ambitious coastal road project that's 80% completed almost, and it's constructed by Brihan Municipal Corporation. And I believe, or this is just my opinion as well, that the sustainability aspect of building these bridges is not really considered with climate change, since with this climate change, there is possibly a higher risk of deterioration of bridges and also the coastal problems that one may face with humans entering nature with all of these complex environments. How do you think we can integrate more systems thinking before we make such decisions?
Well, again, I think the right answer and the best way is for more people to get involved in such dialogues and to understand these issues. We talk about India as the biggest democracy, and I say, no, it is not. Democracy is not about going and voting once every 5 years, right? Democracy is a responsibility. And all of us, and I say me included, right? We all need to learn how to be better citizens. I mean, the challenge of democracy has been on for 2000 plus years, right? And we still haven't figured out how to make a democracy work. But I would say that, till more people don't get engaged in these conversations, and I say how, a lot of the older religions, especially, Judaism and Christianity, you have this one day a week you devote to God, right? You don't do any work. I feel like we need to do one day a week that we devote to our society and stop, just doing our own job and our own work and our own business, right? But I think people need to have more of these conversations and understand. Understanding is not enough, because then we need to demand sort of changes in behavior, which is not easy, because they are very powerful, especially in a city like Bombay, where there's so much money. There are also very powerful interests that, that make these decisions and drive these decisions, right? And we have seen, if anybody has, followed the story of, for example, RA Colony, or even the protests against the coastal road, I mean, there are very, very powerful forces that want these things to happen, because at the end of the day, follow the money, right? See who's making money off it, and you'll understand why things get done. So, I don't have any magical formula, but till we don't see genuine political involvement, and people then also need to be a little more fearless. I think we're also very scared people. We care too much about what people think, and we're easily, I would say, I think, I think we are quite easily intimidated, and I put myself into that bucket as well. We need to find ways to, be more fearless about demanding accountability and educating people and informing people, and also having debate. The other thing is, and I try to be very careful about this. We all have our positions based on what we see and what we understand, and therefore we get very divided, and we sometimes refuse to find a common ground and understand the challenges that somebody else faces in doing their duties, right? So to this extent, we also need to sort of be accommodating and understand why people are making perverse decisions, what are their incentives and pressures. And often, the same government officers you would want to throw something at, when you understand their side of the story, you recognize that their hands are also tied sometimes, right? So we need to use And system thinking, I think, one part is the modeling and so on. It's also a great communication tool. So when you put down those feedback loops and delays, on paper, so it's become much harder to talk in vagueness, and you make the conversation more specific, and therefore become a great communication tool also to bring different stakeholders together and have a conversation on what needs to be done.
Great, thanks. So I'm also looking at the chat box. Rika Hayashi, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? Seems quite interesting, and it covers a couple of questions that other people have asked as well.
Hi, sorry, it's a bit loud here. I hope you can hear me. Sorry. Hi, Manas. Thank you so much. It's been very enlightening to hear you talk, and all these questions have really helped us understand quite a bit of the complexity around applying systems design on cities and city systems. So my question was really related to what you mentioned earlier about how, social values must be represented in sort of these systems that we create. And I guess through some of the works that I've done, I've questioned sort of the ability for us to actually create alignment between what the society actually values and what the decision makers of these designs value, as well as the fact that sometimes what we value as citizens and users might not be the best interest of the sort of the social economy or the social fabric. So I'm wondering what methods or tools or examples you might have in mind to help us understand this better.
Well, that's a very deep question. And I think you took it one step beyond where even Royden was. I think with Royden, we talked about how do you get away from morals? And I think with your question, what comes to mind is how do you get away from the bigger questions of life, right? Like, why do we have these challenges, and what kind of people should we aim to be to create a better society, right? I honestly don't know how to answer that. I mean, I think people need to see alternatives. I think too many people, when we have conversations and brainstorming sessions, I think too many people think there is no choice. They think this is just the way life is. And there are enough people in the past who have talked about how change starts with a small group or with somebody who has got the idea and so you need the idea. You need the strength or the fearlessness to talk about that idea, and then you need the resilience to sort of keep going for a long period of time. Again, I'll say, Jay Forrester would say, he says, all I need to do is to outlive my critics, right? And I think at some level, that's all we need to do, keep plugging away. And as at a workshop with one of the companies we work with, in a company called FluxGen, and the founder said, look, the most influential story in my life was the tortoise and the rabbit, right? Which I think most of us would have heard when we were young, that you keep plugging away at it. You keep sort of, working on what you can do. And hopefully, over time that creates a certain change, or as Gandhi would say, be the change you want to be. And gradually the world sort of starts to change around us, right? I mean, at Leap Cities, while of course I would love it if we had a magical wand and we could do a swish and the whole world would be nice and everyone would be caring and sweet and kind and compassionate and thoughtful and all that. But, I really think that the real challenge, I mean, I also believe that every problem exists for a reason, right? And this is why I said it's hard to sort of get away from a more, let's call it a spiritual perspective on things. I really think that every problem exists for certain reasons, and we are supposed to find ways to overcome it by becoming better people. And so to me, at least at a personal level, the question is, what can I do to become more thoughtful, more compassionate, more fearless, more sort of, more willing to put myself out there to make some of these changes. And then can I, try and find the right people, get a group together, and we start forming those groups, which then become smaller communities and build around them. And, you kind of have this knock-on effect, domino effect. And maybe over 10, 20, 50 years, we see massive change. Now, one thing that gives me hope is, I think, as I said earlier, that we need something to run towards, and we also need something to run away from. The way we are seeing climate change come onto us And I think all the models, I don't know why people still talk about 1.5 degrees, because I think, a lot of the scientists now, the consensus, we are going to blow past 2.5, 3 degrees. Just this afternoon, I read Europe is actually 2.6 degrees warmer already compared to pre-industrial times, right? So this whole 1.1 degree, 1.5 degree, I think is a horrible communication. I mean, I think that's like, I say there are three terrible numbers or statistics that we give too much importance to. One is GDP. So it's a terrible, this should be thrown out. The second is calories. When we talk about nutrition, calories tell you nothing about nutrition whatsoever. It should be thrown out. And third is 1.5 degrees, right? Because Indian cities today are 4 to 7 degrees hotter in the summer than they were 30 years ago, not even 200 years ago, right? 4 to 8 degrees is the data compared to 30 years ago. So when you talk about the 1.1 degrees, you say, what the hell is 1.1 degrees? The moment you say your cities are 8 degrees hotter in the summer, I mean, that's a whole different communication story. And yet we are hung up on this stupid 1.5, 2 degree, 1.1 degree number. And I hope people just throw that out and start talking about more local climate and heating and the effect that come with it. But I feel that I feel climate change is going to be that hard kick in our backside, which if we harness it properly, if we are wise enough, and if we can come together enough, we can really use that to create the next generation of human evolution, which I think will be far more intelligent and wise. And I say, look, the last great extinction, and we're in the middle of a mass extinction, right? The last great extinction led to the end of the dinosaurs and the rise of mammals, which by any definition is a big jump in capability, and for whatever we know of history, intelligence, capability, etc., etc. What I hope is that it'll be a painful period, I think. I hope it isn't, but what I'm expecting is going to be a painful 20, 50, 100 years. And through that process, if we can get people together and rethink, and the quote that Maya also put up, if we can reimagine the future, aided by this hard kick in the ass, which is going to be relentless, right? I mean, COVID came and went. Okay, I mean, I thought COVID would go quicker, but we have forgotten about COVID, right? It was a little bit of a preparation, like prelim exams. But climate change is going to be here for a long, long time. And it's not going to be like deforestation or the ozone hole where a few technical fixes will change it. It's going to require that we fundamentally change what we value, the way we live, the way we consume, and the way we relate, not just to each other as human beings, but to all the natural systems and biodiversity around us. We can't change what's going to happen. All I hope is that we can approach it more intelligently than what seems to be going on right now. And maybe that will sort of, over the next 50 years, will give us what you want, right?
Great. Thank you. So I know Everbright Chakma has his hand raised. I had also seen Sucharita and Saraswati's hand raised, but if you can hold that question and share, then that'll be great. So we will stop with the Everbright's question, and then
thank you.
I have a couple of questions before we wrap up for the day. Yeah.
I'm really sorry if I jumped the queue or something, but since we were talking about this whole coming back to the individual, like the talk became very spirituality is the new heresy, so we have to use it very carefully. So what I'm very curious what happens then, because the nature of who we are as human beings is very there's something in us that doesn't accept boundaries. We want to expand. Some people do it through their money, some people do it through their minds, some people do it through their emotions, love, but they will not stop, and because they're looking for that ever expansion of limitlessness. Yeah. And sadly to say that we should stop at profits is completely counterintuitive to the nature of who they are. So this again comes back to a huge exploration of who we are as human beings. And that is such a difficult topic to come to, I think, because the word spirituality has been thrown around in such dangerous ways and manners, especially in this country as well.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about your thoughts on that, that whole, that dilemma with, actually my nature wants more, but I know my planet cannot sustain that. So how do I move about becoming limitless within a limited possibility?
Economics can be an alternative approach to philosophy, at least to some extent, right? So if you want to avoid talk of spirituality, and I completely agree with you, right? As somebody said, he said, God is not the problem, his or her followers are the problem, right? Now, Dipti posted, and hi Dipti, Dipti posted about donut economics. It's a beautiful framework. It's something that we are trying to use more and more in the Leap Cities programs and Leap Cities Fellowship. It gives us a way to think about how do we, sort of improve quality of life while reducing our footprint, right? There are studies that show that once income, and this is in the Western world, I haven't seen similar studies for low-income countries or developing countries, but it said that once income reaches about $50,000, $60,000 or $60,000, $70,000 per capita, increasing income actually does not lead to increasing happiness. But there are other things you can do which are non-financial, which can keep increasing happiness much, much, much beyond that income level, right? So we need to sort of fight some of the economic dogmas which have gotten embedded into policies and the common consciousness, which says that more money is what we need and that is what success is. And unfortunately, in India, we have completely bought that story, and we're now trying to race to the bottom, saying, the Down to Earth is an amazing magazine for any of you, who don't subscribe to it, please do. And a few months back, they had an issue which talked about all the things we've done in the last 30 years to degrade the environment in the pursuit of economic growth, right? And then you have air pollution. Even now, there are laws that are making forests easier to mine, just as of last week. We need to fight that. And for that, we need to understand that first, there is something that, what is the goal? Economic growth is not the goal for human beings. It is happiness, right? It is well-being. It is being happier, being well, being comfortable. And if we can change the conversation towards that, then I feel we can also, that the economic conversation follows, how much extraction, how much exploitation do we really need to give us our basic needs? And like I said, some people can consume a lot less. Some people do need more. And then we find those balances where we can hopefully reach a level of sustainability, with our economic resources. What do we reward, right? I mean, one of the big disasters has been, there's this concept in industry called planned obsolescence, right? You want people to buy a new car every 8 years. A car can last 25, 30 years, right? In Bombay, you'll still see those, there's a joke of the Parsis who will polish their car and take care of it. And 40 years later, they're driving the same car around and it works beautifully, gets you from point A to point B. And yet our industry is driving towards this 5-year, 7-year, recycle your car and so on. Why, right? And the problem is we reward that behavior. Our graduates want to become those people. They want to work in those companies. They want to rise to those, decision-making positions where they'll be forced by the financial system and the political system and the common imagination to make those same decisions which are bad for the planet and actually bad for us. It's not even bad for planet. I mean, all this stuff we're seeing is bad for human health, our mental health, our physical health, our social health. So, we need the best behavior change experts working on these problems. We need more honest conversation. I think a lot of climate activists go overboard in painting a doomsday scenario, which I think is also, to my mind, sometimes makes me very upset and even angry. It borders on fake news, the way we throw out this, human beings will go extinct. I say, look, I don't know about that. I think we have been remarkably adaptable. But I do see that there'll be a lot of problems. Maybe we see a shrinking population, which would be good. I'll just end with this because this is one of my little jokes. I've done a lot of work on sanitation, right? And of course, waste management and water pollution is a big problem in sanitation. Now, there are practices and there are people out there who eat almost nothing. I think there's actually a practice where you consume energy from the sun directly. And there are a lot of documented examples and cases where you can actually learn to survive on close to zero food, right? Now I say that, look, if we could get the whole of Earth's population to practice those sort of things, you will solve your food crisis, you will solve your agriculture crisis, you will solve the land degradation crisis, and you'll solve all your waste and wastewater pollution crisis all in one go, right? And Earth can support 20 billion people living very happily and contently without all these problems. Now the question is, do we have the knowledge and the courage and the discipline to pursue that, or are our financial and industrial and political systems going to keep taking us down this path because of their interests and convenience, and the rest of us kind of go along with it because we can't fight it? I think that's really the question. And I think a lot of systems thinking can bring us around to these solutions. How to do it, of course, is always much harder. The ideas are simple. Indians have all the solutions. We can sit and talk and we can solve all the world's problems. Is the how that is the hard part. And for that, I think it's just a matter of, it's a hard matter of every person elevating their way of life, their narrative, their way of living, and then influencing others till it becomes a mass, critical mass or a mass movement, which can make some of these transitions as painlessly as possible. We don't want French Revolution kind of change of, of systems. I think there are much better ways to do it, but that's not easy either. So,
Awesome.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I am really grateful to have this wonderful and engaging audience with us who have done they've really made my job easy by asking those insightful questions and providing some comments as well. So now, I mean, a little bit of philosophy, because we went from systems to spirituality to aesthetic to politics to spirituality again, I think, and then of course regeneration and the donut economy. I want to know, we've touched upon a lot of areas, but then if we were to come back, Manas, and then pin down to, let's say, what are 3 things that you would suggest are critical when we talk about some form of activating citizen engagement to be able to deal with or tackle with some of these problems more holistically? What would you say those are?
I think, one of the things, what you're doing, creating these forums for people to start thinking, but then we need to go beyond 1 hour conversation and really go deep and, get people involved in sort of modeling things and understanding some of the models and contributing to it, right? Where's Anshul? Yeah, there. As Anshul knows, at IIT Bombay, we're talking about creating a center for system dynamics and systems thinking. And actually, there's been a lot of support, a lot of interest from the Center for Urban Studies and Engineering, Urban Sciences and Engineering at IIT to participate in this. So I think, I think definitely more conversation, more exercise, creating those policy papers, and I think showing people that imagination, that there is an alternate future which is possible in our context. See, taking degrowth ideas from the US, applying it to India, very difficult when you've got 60% of your population living in slums, right? But we need to bring entrepreneurs together who are trying to solve problems through, entrepreneurship at very narrow pockets and perspectives. NGOs have their own perspectives, and food is the most important problem, or health is the most important problem. And I think, creating these discussions and then finding ways to apply both overt and covert pressure on decision makers, both in industry and civil society and politics, I think matters. So I think a lot of some decisions that need to be things that can be done, but more, I think more modeling. I mean, we have not put out any models saying that this is how you achieve better quality of life in India. The conversation is very, very shallow today. And Chakma, I would just say that, look, everything is a double-edged sword, right? We can talk about technology, and that is used for good and bad, and so is policy, and so is finance, and so is spirituality or religion, right? And the question is, how do we, how do we change the narrative and make it a more responsible usage of those is also what we need to focus on, because policy can also be used to hurt people as much as it is to improve quality of life, right? But I think we need to use more media more effectively, get people involved, do more of these conversations, fellowship, where people really go deep into understanding problems and try to design solutions, and then get more buy-in from different groups in society. The conflicts will be inevitable, right? People have different perspectives and different values. It's something we have to work through. There's no shortcut. I don't think.
Great, thanks. Yes, Saraswati.
So the only question that I had for you, Manas, is, so this entire process, is it a point of arrival, or is it a point of arrival to start the next? That's the question.
What do you mean? Which point are you?
So in terms of, let's say, I mean, we have solved Mumbai's problem. So would that be a point of arrival, or would that be a point of the next wave that needs to start?
I mean, I would imagine it's the latter. I think there is so much left to grow. And if you're looking for growth, I mean, I think the growth of human decency and happiness, it can be a never-ending journey, right? It goes far beyond fixing certain services and the physical environment and making the city resilient to climate change. I think those are just still the physical level problem that we're dealing with. And then you have, like your Maslow's hierarchy, right? You sort of first deal with physical problem, which is a lot of what we're talking about right now. Then you'll have sort of mental and emotional things to deal with. How do you make people happier, content, safer? And it's not a short journey, right? I mean, 60% of people living in slums, you've got huge amount of abuse based on gender, for example, or age. You've got huge issues in the city with regard to, forced labor, the sex industry, prostitution, child labor, etc. So I don't think there's any shortage of things for us to be solving, at least in our lifetime. And I think we can solve these. I think we get to that starting point where people can then start thinking about higher levels of happiness and oneness and being. And I think that journey then it can be in its own infinite sort of journey. So I don't think the goalpost is not fixed. I think is one of the things, as you approach the goalpost, the goal keeps receding because you just find higher and higher level problems to solve and things to achieve, right? And look, there's a lot of hope because this is what I discovered studying more and more history. If you look at cities or our society, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, in many ways, they were pretty awful places to live in, right? A lot of the things we enjoy today, we may complain about what we have today, and there's good reason to complain. Because I say the glass is always half full and it is half empty, right? We need to have gratitude for the half full part, all the good stuff that we have, and then we need to keep working towards that even better, which is filling up that half empty bit. And I think there's a lot that can be done on that. So I think there's a lot of scope to create a better society.
That was lovely. Thanks.
So I'm going to give a quick opportunity to anyone who's not spoken yet. Maybe Shweta, Dipti, I know you've posted comments, so if you have anything to share quickly before we close.
Just a great platform. This is Shweta here. Sorry, I can't turn on you, but it's a great platform that you set up this, and Manas shared this last minute, but I'm glad I could join. And I'm going to be part of the cohort of the Leap Mumbai. Hopefully we can bring out some template or some kind of format which we can use to leverage further to do better projects or better way of living a life in a place like Mumbai. That's all.
Awesome. Thank you. Dipti?
Hi, I am not sure how to sort of crisply say what I want to, but I think one of the things I feel happens is that we are all operating in silos. And I think if we are conscious of that, then we can try and actually connect the dots to the different networks that we may be part of, which we realize are silos. And I'll give an example of that. So, for example, I have done my MBA, and so I'm part of my batch group there. And then through the course of life, different places that I've worked, which have all been in the mainstream sort of area. But in the last decade, I have come into the social sector. And I can act as a bridge between these two worlds, which is something which is work in progress for me, but which I think can hugely sort of make a difference to the kinds of issues that we're talking about. So I'm just leaving that as a thought for everybody to look at, in their their personal level. And then I think I've just had the exposure to a few modalities which are not very well known. So there's something called nonviolent communication, which helps to understand that all our actions are driven from our needs. And I don't think there's much point trying to explain that. But yeah, there are just a whole lot of modalities which I think can help fill the gaps that are there, at a very fundamental level. So yeah, I think those are just two thoughts that I wanted to share. Thank you so much. This was fantastic.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I once again want to remind all of us that tomorrow we have day 2 of the story of systems in Mumbai city, where we will be also co-creating and putting thoughts like the ones shared by Dipti. So it'll be wonderful to have you all as part of that event as well. And before we close, I would request if all of you can switch on, or those who can switch on your videos, I would request you to do so we can have a quick capture of this moment.
Group photo. Just one thing I'll just leave, the Mumbai Climate Action Plan, which was prepared a couple of years ago by WRI, actually is a pretty good document. So for all those who are concerned about the city, I think it's definitely a document worth reading and studying a little bit. MCAP, the Mumbai Climate Action Plan.
Yep, we'll share that there as well.
Great. I'll capture a screenshot in 3, 2, 1. Great. We will share it on LinkedIn, and we will also share some of the insights, and it's been recorded, so we will share that as well eventually.
Awesome. We feel good. It's been a wonderful beginning, and then some of us are also going to continue this journey with Manas into the Leap Cities Fellowship, into getting our hands dirty and seeing how it can be done. But it has been a fantastic evening, and I thank one and all for being a part of this conversation. And thank you, Manas, for making the time and sharing from your experience of making cities healthier, happier, sustainable, and livable.
Absolutely. Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you Maya and Anshul and Anya for putting this together. It is lovely to meet all of you, and yeah, I hope we do a lot more stuff going forward.
Absolutely.